The sun had set, casting a soft orange glow over the city as she hurried through the crowded streets, a knot tightening in her stomach. She hadn't planned on being here. A few weeks ago, her life was centered around the routine of her job, her kids, and the endless responsibilities that came with being a single mother. But now, thanks to her best friend's persistence, she was about to step into a world she didn't feel ready for, a blind date with a man she had never met. She could feel the cool night air brushing against her face, her breath coming out in small puffs. She checked her phone again, her mind racing. "Dinner at 7, the text said. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her wonder if she was doing the right thing. She was no stranger to the idea of dating, but it had been years since she'd considered the possibility of meeting someone new. After all, the last time she had tried it had ended in heartbreak. But her friend had insisted, telling her that this man was different, someone worth meeting. A wealthy, successful businessman who supposedly appreciated the value of hard work and humility. She wasn't convinced. With every step, her mind flashed to the details of her life. The constant juggling act of working full-time, raising 2 children, and trying to hold on to a sense of her own identity. Her life was far from glamorous. She didn't have fancy clothes, designer bags, or a glamorous career. She was a single mom who struggled every day to make ends meet. Her budget was tight, and her plans for the night were simple: dinner, a little small talk, and then back to her usual world. She glanced at her reflection in a nearby store window. Her clothes were fine, but they were nothing special. She wasn't about to impress anyone with her appearance, but it wasn't her looks that worried her. It was the fear of feeling out of place. What if he was one of those men who judged others based on their status? What if he looked down on her because she didn't have the kind of life he was used to? She wasn't sure if she could handle another man making her feel inferior. As she approached the restaurant, she could already feel the tension in her chest tightening. It was a high-end place, the kind she'd never step foot in unless it was a special occasion. The building's elegant exterior loomed in front of her, the soft hum of voices and clinking silverware drifting out of the open door. She felt a wave of insecurity. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She glanced around nervously, searching for him. And then she saw him. He was exactly as her friend had described him, a tall, striking man with a commanding presence. His sharp suit and confident posture made him stand out in the crowd. He looked every bit the part of a successful businessman, the type of man who could have any woman he wanted. He sat at a table near the window, glancing at his watch as if he had somewhere more important to be. She swallowed hard. Her heart skipped a beat, but not in the way she had hoped. She felt suddenly small, out of place. She wasn't sure why she had agreed to this. What could they possibly have in common? "Excuse me, are you here to meet someone?" the host asked, pulling her from her thoughts. "Yes, I'm meeting someone," she replied, her voice sounding weaker than she intended. The host smiled and led her toward the table. As she approached, the man stood, his gaze flicking up to meet hers. His eyes were dark and piercing, but there was something else there, something she couldn't quite place. He held out his hand and she shook it, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "You must be—" She froze for a moment, unsure if she should use her name or wait for him to guess. She forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, I'm here." He smiled, but there was something in his expression, something unreadable. He motioned for her to sit, and she did, careful to maintain her composure. "So, tell me about yourself," he said casually, sitting down across from her. She was momentarily taken aback by his directness. She had expected small talk, questions about her job, her family, maybe even her hobbies. But instead, he seemed to want to dive right in, as if they had known each other for years. She hesitated, unsure where to start. "Well, I'm a single mother. I work full-time as an office manager. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." He nodded, but his expression remained neutral. "And what do you do for fun?" he asked, clearly expecting something more than the routine she had just described. She thought for a moment, wondering how much she could share without sounding too ordinary. I don't have a lot of free time. Between work and taking care of my kids, I don't get out much. But when I do, I like to read or maybe catch a movie with friends." He nodded again, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a slight raise of an eyebrow that made her uncomfortable. She couldn't tell if he was genuinely interested or if he was simply being polite. She tried to brush it off, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow disappointed by her response. Before she could say anything else, the waiter appeared, interrupting the silence. "Good evening. May I take your order?" he asked. She glanced at the menu briefly. The prices were staggering. Her stomach twisted as she realized she couldn't afford much. She had come here thinking the night would be low-key, just dinner. But now the situation felt heavier, like a test. She wasn't sure if she should stick to something small and modest or just order what she wanted and figure it out later. The man ordered without hesitation, selecting a wine and a few dishes that sounded more expensive than anything she had ever considered. She barely noticed what he ordered. She was too focused on the anxiety creeping up her spine. When the waiter turned to her, she forced herself to speak. "I'll have the salad," she said quietly, hoping it wouldn't be too much. The man glanced at her briefly, and for a split second she thought she saw a flicker of judgment in his eyes. But it disappeared so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. He turned back to the waiter, who nodded and walked away. The silence returned. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if this was going well or if she was just another woman on his list of blind dates. The more she sat there, the more she felt like an outsider, trapped in a world that wasn't hers. She tried to focus on the conversation, but her mind kept drifting back to the fact that she only had $7 left in her wallet. What would happen if the bill came and she couldn't pay for her share? What would he think of her then? She was too proud to ask for help, but she knew she couldn't afford to be humiliated. She needed to find a way out of this awkward situation, but she had no idea how. As they waited for their food, the conversation faltered. He asked her a few more questions about her life, but they felt rehearsed, forced. He spoke more about himself, his travels, his businesses, his success, leaving her to listen and nod along, feeling increasingly small. But despite the unease, there was a strange curiosity growing inside her. She didn't know if it was the tension of the evening or something more, but she couldn't help but wonder. Was there more to this man than his wealth and status, or was she just another dinner date to him? A fleeting moment in a life full of luxury and privilege. As the waiter brought their food, she took a deep breath, knowing that the next few moments could change everything. The meal arrived, and the atmosphere around the table grew thicker with tension. The man, who had effortlessly ordered the finest dishes on the menu, seemed completely at ease in this lavish setting. His eyes moved around the room, occasionally glancing at his phone, as if he had more important things on his mind than the woman sitting across from him. She, on the other hand, felt trapped. The food in front of her looked exquisite, far more expensive than anything she'd ever eaten. The rich colors of the dish contrasted with her nervousness, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt building up inside her. She had only $7 left in her wallet. The weight of that fact pressed heavily on her chest. She picked up her fork, pretending to enjoy the meal. Her mind raced with thoughts of how this was going to play out. She couldn't help but wonder how he would react when the bill arrived. Would he notice that she hadn't ordered much? Would he think she was cheap or awkward? What if he saw the insecurity in her eyes? Despite her discomfort, she tried to keep the conversation going. She asked him about his work, his business ventures, and how he had built his fortune. He spoke with a level of confidence that almost felt like arrogance, detailing his rise to the top and the deals he had made over the years. His words were polished, rehearsed, and filled with pride. But as he spoke, she couldn't help but notice a hint of loneliness behind his eyes, as if he was trying to prove something to the world, and maybe to himself. He asked her a few more questions, but they were the same generic ones about her background. He didn't seem particularly interested in her life, and she could sense that. It felt as though he was simply going through the motions of the evening, marking off a checklist of things to do. As the meal went on, her unease grew. She felt as though she was sinking further into the background, fading into the shadows of his world. He was so much more than she could ever imagine being. The designer suit he wore, the confident manner in which he carried himself, it all made her feel like a small, insignificant piece in a puzzle she didn't belong to. She pushed her plate away slightly, feeling full but not from the food. The conversation felt more like an interrogation now, and she wasn't sure how to break free from the growing awkwardness. "So tell me," he said, his voice steady, "what's your biggest dream? What do you want to accomplish in life?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't thought about her dreams in a long time. Between the responsibilities of raising 2 kids on her own and trying to make ends meet, dreams had become a distant memory. The weight of daily survival had taken over, and all she could focus on was the here and now. She smiled softly, trying to cover up the ache in her chest. "I just want to give my kids the best life I can. I want them to have opportunities I never had." He nodded thoughtfully, but there was something in his expression that made her feel even smaller. He seemed to understand her words, but it also felt as though he had heard them 1,000 times before. He didn't know what it was like to struggle, really struggle like she did. To make sacrifices for your children, to go without so they could have what they needed. To work so hard that you sometimes forget what it feels like to rest. She pushed the thoughts away, trying to focus on the conversation. But the words seemed to flow from him like they were rehearsed, and the distance between them felt wider with every passing second. "So, what kind of places do you like to travel to?" he asked, taking a sip of his wine. She hadn't traveled much in recent years. Her trips had been few and far between, mostly to visit family or take the kids on small vacations. But she didn't want to sound boring, so she forced a smile. "I'd love to go to Paris someday," she said. "It's always been on my list." He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Paris, that's a bit typical, don't you think? Everyone wants to go there." She felt a twinge of embarrassment, her face flushing. "Well, it's always been a dream," she said, trying to laugh it off. "Maybe one day." "Maybe," he repeated, his voice lacking warmth. "But dreams are only as good as the action behind them. If you really want something, you have to take risks." The words stung more than she expected. She wasn't sure if he meant it to be encouraging or condescending, but it felt like he was judging her for not already living the life she envisioned, for not being a person who could afford to take risks, to go after dreams without worrying about the consequences. As they continued talking, her mind wandered. She had tried to stay engaged, to make this dinner as pleasant as possible, but the truth was, it was becoming harder to hide her discomfort. The gap between their worlds felt insurmountable. The more he spoke about his businesses, his properties, his travels to exotic places, the more she felt like an outsider looking in. She glanced at the waiter as he came by with more wine. The rich, smooth liquid was tempting, but she couldn't bring herself to order another glass. She couldn't afford to let herself get too comfortable in this world. She had no place here. The night was dragging on, and she couldn't help but notice the way he glanced at his watch every so often, as if he had somewhere better to be. She had always heard that rich people were impatient with others, and now she could see it for herself. The conversation shifted again, this time to something more personal. "So how do you manage it all?" he asked, his tone almost curious now. "Being a single mother, working full-time and still making time for yourself. How do you do it?" Her heart skipped a beat. She had never really thought about it that way before. She wasn't sure how she did it. She just did. "I guess I don't really have a choice," she replied, forcing a smile. "I do what I have to for my kids. There's no time to think about it much." He leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "That's admirable," he said, but there was a distance in his voice. "But surely you deserve more than just getting by, don't you?" The words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't need him to remind her that she had sacrificed so much. She didn't need him to tell her that she deserved more. She knew that already. But sometimes it felt as though life had stripped her of the chance to get more. Her dreams, her desires had taken a backseat to the reality of survival. For the first time that evening, she felt the weight of the conversation sink in. She wanted to say something honest, but she didn't know how to explain what it felt like to constantly push yourself to the limit, to give everything and still come up short. To be judged by people who had no idea what it was like to live paycheck to paycheck, but the words never came. Instead, she simply nodded. "I guess so," she said quietly. The silence between them grew heavy. She felt the gap between them widening, not just because of their different lives, but because he had no idea what it was like to carry the weight she carried every day, to live with the constant fear of not being enough, to fight for a better life when the odds were stacked against you. She could feel her chest tightening again, the familiar anxiety creeping in. The moment felt like it was slipping away. The waiter returned with the check and her stomach dropped. She didn't want to think about it, but she had to. How would she handle this? How could she avoid the inevitable? Her fingers gripped the edge of the table as she waited, her mind spinning. As the waiter placed the check down on the table, the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. She glanced at the bill quickly, trying to make sense of the numbers. It was far more than she had expected, far more than she could afford. Her heart began to race as the weight of the moment sunk in. She reached into her purse, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the few bills she had left. She counted them quickly, only $7, and it wasn't enough. She had hoped, prayed that the night wouldn't come to this, but now it was all too real. She had no idea how she was going to handle this. She wasn't about to embarrass herself, but what choice did she have? She looked across the table at him, sitting there so casually. He hadn't even noticed the tension that was rising between them. His eyes were focused on his phone again, scrolling through messages, not even acknowledging the check in front of him. She couldn't blame him for being distracted. After all, he was a businessman, probably used to handling large amounts of money and transactions with ease. But to her, this moment felt like everything. She wasn't just facing an awkward dinner. She was facing the potential humiliation of being exposed as someone who couldn't even pay for a meal. For a few moments, she just sat there, frozen in place. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to say something, to ask for help, but pride kept her silent. She didn't want him to think less of her, to see her as just another woman asking for a handout. She had been independent for so long, had done everything on her own. And now this one moment, this one dinner, felt like it might ruin everything. As she stared at the check, her mind raced through all the possible scenarios. She could try to pay with her $7, but it would never cover the cost. She could ask him to pay, but that would feel like admitting defeat. She could pretend everything was fine, but the truth was that she was sinking deeper into panic with every passing second. "Are you okay?" His voice suddenly broke through her thoughts, and she looked up at him, startled. He had put his phone down and was watching her, his expression softening as he noticed the tension on her face. She forced a smile, trying to mask her fear. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said, but her voice betrayed her. There was a tremor in it that she couldn't hide. He raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing that something was off. "You don't look fine," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Is everything okay?" The concern in his voice caught her off guard. She had expected him to be dismissive, to act as though it didn't matter to him. But here he was actually noticing that something was wrong. It threw her off. She hadn't expected him to care. She hesitated, unsure whether to be honest or to keep pretending. "I didn't realize the bill would be this much." He nodded, glancing at the check with a calmness that only seemed to highlight how out of control she felt. For a moment she thought he might dismiss it, maybe offer to pay and move on, but instead he did something completely unexpected. "I can cover it," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Her stomach dropped. She wasn't sure what to feel. Relief? Embarrassment? Both? She hadn't expected him to step in so easily, and she certainly hadn't expected him to offer without any hesitation. But a part of her deep down knew that she couldn't let him pay. "Not like this." "No, I can't let you do that," she said quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the check, trying to grab it. "I'll figure something out. I wasn't prepared for this." He didn't pull back. Instead, he just watched her, his gaze steady but not judgmental. "You don't have to figure anything out," he said softly. "You're not the first person to be caught off guard by a dinner bill. Let me help." There it was again, the kindness that she hadn't expected. It was strange, almost jarring given everything about the situation. He was a man who could have made this entire evening about himself, about his wealth, his power, his lifestyle. Instead, he was offering a moment of genuine care. But still, she couldn't bring herself to accept it. The weight of her pride pressed down on her like 1,000 pounds, and she felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I don't want you to think less of me." His expression softened, and for the first time that evening, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just business or indifference. There was a quiet understanding there, something that spoke to her in a way words couldn't. He leaned back in his chair, still watching her but without the impatience he had shown earlier. "Why would I think less of you?" he asked gently. "Because you're struggling? Because you didn't expect a big bill at dinner? I'm not here to judge you, you know." The honesty in his voice hit her harder than she expected. She had built up this entire narrative in her mind about how he would view her, how he would think she wasn't worthy of his time because she didn't have the same lifestyle. But he wasn't acting like that at all. Instead, he was offering her something far more valuable than money: understanding. I know it's hard, he continued, his voice quieter now. But you don't have to do everything alone. You're not weak because you need help sometimes. She felt her throat tighten. She wasn't sure why, but something in the way he spoke touched her. She had always believed that needing help was a sign of weakness. She had grown up with that idea, raised on the belief that you had to do it all yourself no matter what. But now, sitting here with him, she realized that maybe she had been wrong. Maybe strength didn't come from doing everything alone. Maybe it came from accepting help when you needed it most. For a long moment, they sat there in silence. The restaurant around them continued on, oblivious to their conversation. She could hear the distant laughter of other diners, the clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of conversations. But in this little bubble, in this moment, everything else faded away. It was just the two of them, standing at an unspoken crossroads. Finally, she looked up at him, her heart pounding. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, he replied, giving her a small smile. Just know that it's okay. No judgment here. For the first time that night, she felt like she could breathe. The walls she had built up around herself, walls of pride, fear, and shame, began to crack. She wasn't sure what had changed in the last few minutes, but something had shifted. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice or the simple fact that he hadn't treated her like she was beneath him. She finally nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay, she said, the weight in her chest lightening just a little. Okay, I'll let you help. And for the first time that night, she didn't feel so alone. The following days passed quietly, yet something about that night stayed with her. The memory of the dinner, the bill, and the unexpected kindness lingered in her mind. She found herself replaying the conversation over and over again, trying to understand what had happened. She hadn't expected him to be so understanding, so willing to help without making her feel small. She had always thought that people like him, people with wealth and success, looked at her, someone who struggled day to day, as if she was less than them. But he hadn't done that. Instead, he had treated her with a respect she didn't know she deserved. It was a strange feeling, and one she wasn't sure how to process. She wasn't used to being helped. She wasn't used to anyone seeing her as anything other than a mother and a worker, someone who had to keep everything together. She had spent years proving to herself that she could handle everything on her own, that asking for help would mean failure. Yet that night she had let someone in, and somehow it had changed her. The next few days she tried to return to her routine, her job, the kids, the never-ending list of tasks that seemed to multiply every time she crossed something off. She didn't have much time to think about the dinner or the man she had shared it with. But every time she did, a small warmth would settle in her chest. He had texted her a few times, checking in and making sure everything was going well. At first she had been hesitant to respond, unsure of how to handle his messages. But his tone had been kind, without any pressure. He wasn't asking for anything, just checking in, offering a moment of connection. She found herself responding more than she expected. Their conversations were light at first, small talk about work, the weather, the kids. She liked how easy it was, how they didn't have to talk about anything serious. But soon the small talk turned into something deeper. They began to talk about their lives, about their hopes, their struggles, and the things they wished for. She was surprised by how much she found herself sharing. She had always kept things close to her chest, afraid of opening up, of revealing too much. But with him it felt different. There was no judgment, no expectation. Just two people talking, trying to understand each other. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, she found herself sitting in the quiet of her apartment, phone in hand, staring at a message he had sent. He had asked her about her dreams again, and for the first time she found herself truly considering the question. What did she want? What did she really want out of life? She had spent so many years surviving, doing what she had to do for her kids, for her family. She had stopped thinking about herself. But now she realized that maybe it was time to start. She typed a response, her fingers hesitant at first, but then the words started to flow. She told him about her dreams of opening her own business, of helping other single mothers like herself find a way to balance work and family without losing themselves in the process. It was something she had always wanted to do but had never been able to pursue. There was always something more urgent. Bills, appointments, chores. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. His response came quickly. That sounds amazing. I believe you can do it. You've already shown incredible strength, just by how you handle everything on your own. She smiled as she read his words. It was the kind of support she had never asked for but had always wanted. He wasn't just being polite or flattering her. He genuinely believed in her, and it made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The days after that message seemed to carry a different energy. She found herself thinking about the future more, about what was possible, about the things she had put on hold for so long. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years it felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. One evening, a few weeks later, he invited her out again. This time there was no grand restaurant or expensive meal. He suggested a simple coffee date at a cozy cafe, a place where they could just talk, no pressure. She agreed, feeling a little nervous but also excited. It was strange, this connection they had. She wasn't sure where it was going, but she knew she didn't want to let it slip away. The cafe was warm and quiet, a stark contrast to the fancy restaurant where they had first met. She arrived a little early, trying to calm her nerves. She wasn't sure if this was just a friendly outing or something more. But whatever it was, she was open to it. She wanted to see where it could go. When he arrived, he greeted her with a smile, looking as relaxed as ever. There was no formality, no pressure, just two people meeting for coffee. They sat down at a small table by the window, the evening light casting a soft glow over the scene. "So, tell me more about your business idea," he said after they ordered their drinks. "I want to hear everything." She laughed softly, surprised by his genuine interest. "Well, it's still in the early stages," she explained. "But I've been thinking a lot about how I can help other single mothers who are struggling like I did. There are so many women out there who feel like they can't balance everything, who feel like they have to sacrifice their dreams just to get by. I want to show them that they don't have to choose." He nodded thoughtfully, taking in her words. "I think that's a powerful idea," he said. "It's something that's needed, and I know you're the kind of person who can make it happen." She felt a rush of warmth spread through her. His words, his belief in her, it was more than she had ever expected from this unexpected connection. He didn't just see her as a single mother struggling to make ends meet. He saw her potential. He saw the strength in her that she had almost forgotten was there. They spent the next couple of hours talking, laughing, and sharing stories about their lives. There was no rush, no pressure. Just two people getting to know each other, one step at a time. She found herself feeling more comfortable with him, more at ease than she had ever felt with anyone in a long time. As the evening drew to a close, they stood up to leave. He walked her to her car, and once again she found herself surprised by his kindness. He didn't try to make this night anything more than it was, just a chance to connect, to enjoy each other's company. And yet in the simplicity of it all, she felt something growing between them. He looked at her, his eyes warm. "I'm really glad we did this," he said quietly. "I've enjoyed getting to know you." "Me too," she replied, her heart beating a little faster. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. There was a sense of understanding between them, a feeling that they were both on the same page. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could let herself hope again. As she drove home that night, the road ahead seemed a little less uncertain. She still had a lot to figure out, a lot of obstacles to overcome, but now she had something she hadn't had in a long time: belief. Belief in herself, in her dreams, and maybe, just maybe, in the possibility of something more. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet, steady change. Every time she thought about him, there was a sense of warmth that grew in her chest. It wasn't the kind of warmth that came from infatuation or grand gestures. It was a quieter, deeper warmth that seemed to come from something more substantial, more lasting. They continued to meet, sometimes for coffee, other times just for a walk in the park, or a simple dinner at a local restaurant. Each time she felt herself becoming more at ease in his presence. He never rushed things, never pushed her for more than she was ready to give. And as the days passed, she realized that this was different from anything she had ever experienced before. It wasn't about the superficial things, his wealth, his status, his lifestyle. It was about how he saw her, how he made her feel like she was worth more than just the struggle of her everyday life. She had started to share more about her dreams, the things that had been locked away for so long, and he listened. He didn't just nod and smile like people often did when they didn't truly care. He asked questions, offered advice, and most importantly, he made her feel like she could actually do it. The business idea she had once only whispered to herself now felt real, like something she could actually build. There were moments, small moments, when she would catch him looking at her in a way that made her heart race. It wasn't the look of someone interested in a casual fling. It was the kind of look that made her feel like she was being seen for the first time in a long while. Not just as a single mother, not just as a woman trying to make it through each day, but as herself, someone with her own dreams, her own desires, her own worth. But even with all the change, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She had grown used to this new connection between them, but she couldn't ignore the question that had been on her mind since that first dinner. What did he want? What was he looking for? She had never asked him directly. She didn't want to seem too forward, but there were moments when she couldn't help but wonder if he was seeing her the same way she was seeing him. Could he really be interested in her? Or was she just another part of his charity project, a woman he could fix with his wealth and resources? One evening, after a particularly long conversation about her business idea and what steps she would need to take next, she found herself staring at him in silence, the question finally bubbling to the surface. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice hesitant. "Of course," he replied, his eyes soft with encouragement. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "What do you want from me? I mean, what is this to you?" He looked at her, and for a moment there was a pause. A stillness between them that seemed to stretch on longer than she expected. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she didn't back down. She needed to know. She needed to hear it from him. He leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "What do I want from you?" he repeated, as if the question itself was something he hadn't considered. Then slowly he answered, "I want to get to know you. I want to see who you are beyond the surface, and I want to help you chase the things you've always wanted, whether that's your business, your dreams, or whatever comes next. But most of all, I want you to know that I'm here because I believe in you, not because of anything I can give you." The sincerity in his voice hit her harder than she expected. She had feared that all this time, all these small moments of connection had just been part of a game to him, a way to fix a life that was broken. But his words, the way he said them, made her realize that he wasn't looking at her as a project or a charity case. He wasn't trying to fix her. He was simply there, standing beside her, offering his support. She felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of everything she had been holding in finally starting to ease. She had spent so long believing that she had to do everything on her own, that any help was a sign of weakness. But now with him, she understood that maybe strength didn't always come from doing things alone. Maybe it came from accepting the help and support of others. "I'm not used to this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I've spent so many years doing everything on my own. I never thought anyone would want to help, let alone believe in me." He smiled gently. "I get it. I've been there too, in different ways. But we all need help sometimes. And we all need people who believe in us." The weight that had been pressing on her chest seemed to lift just a little more. She had always believed that love, if it ever came, had to be earned, had to be fought for. But this wasn't a battle. It wasn't about earning his affection or proving herself worthy. It was about two people seeing each other for who they truly were, without judgment, without expectations. And in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong all along. Maybe love wasn't about winning someone over. Maybe it was about finding someone who could see the value in you even when you couldn't see it in yourself. And that, more than anything, was what made this connection so special. As they stood up to leave the cafe that night, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The uncertainty that had once clouded her mind had cleared, replaced by something simpler, something real. She didn't know what the future held, or where this connection would go. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't afraid of the unknown. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was doing everything alone. They walked out into the cool evening air, side by side, each step forward feeling like a step towards something new. The future was still uncertain, but there was a quiet confidence in her now, something she had been missing for years. She had her dreams, her goals, and now she had someone who believed in her, someone who saw her for more than just her struggles, and that, she realized, was worth more than anything she could have ever imagined. The road ahead might not be easy, and there would be challenges to face. But for the first time, she felt like she had everything she needed to walk it: strength, belief, and the knowledge that she didn't have to face it alone.